It's a lot of nonsense.
Idiots saying nonsense.
Enough of this nonsense. Nonsense! Nonsense!
Layers and layers of nonsense.
What is this nonsense?
Nonsense is everywhere, surrounding us like an invisible cloud.
Nonsense in a brand new light.
That is what is nonsense.
Every day they write articles on nonsense.
A little nonsense knows relished by the wisest.
Nonsense.
Hello and welcome to Nonsense, the podcast where no topic is off topic and we explore the depths of the nonsensical world in which we currently find ourselves living. Today I'm joined by Sofiane Delloue, founder and CEO of newlife.ai, a quickly growing app and digital ecosystem focused on creating a whole new kind of digital economy for content creators and curators alike, utilizing the power of blockchain and artificial intelligence. He's a brilliant theorist, strategist, and one of the most insightful human beings I know, a true visionary in every sense of the word. Welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for having me. I'm very proud and excited to join this podcast. We met a couple of years ago in person when it was still possible, and yeah, we had a very good time, and I'm glad we kept in touch.
Yeah, me too, for sure. Yeah, it's been great. We've had a large number of really good conversations over the last few years.
Yeah, it's time to share with the world some of them.
Exactly. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about kind of who you are, your history, and kind of give us a little brief history into how New Life came into being?
All right, so I was born in the 80s, so I'm one of those who have still known the world without internet. And I grew up in the north of Paris, in the hood, let's say, and I basically left school very early. It was not for me, and I discovered internet as kind of a getaway to this creative playground, which internet has become. And I participated in many startups. A couple of them were acquired, so it was very interesting experiences. And I've been very interested in the space between, culture and technology. Being born in Paris, we have this sense of, lifestyle or aesthetics, that is very important in our life. And yeah, I loved, I wanted to be an industrial designer as a kid, and I couldn't make it, but somehow I'm going into this direction of art and technology. So that's my two main interests. And when it comes to New Life, so the general idea behind New Life is that we are shifting towards postmodernity, and the economy and the infrastructures are not ready for it. So if you look at the way industrialism works, you have this very simple or complex structure where people have a very simple role. You are defined by your job and by your skills. So you go to study for years and you become that specialism. And the world that is about to emerge is very, very different. And so we are looking at this, and we are looking at how we can go back to biology and reopen all the possibilities, especially around creativity, because we believe the future will be for creatives. AI and robots are going to replace humans for jobs. So we are going to be liberated and be less robotic. Like being robotic was very efficient in a factory line, and education was designed for having people, let's say, operating machines and working with machines and becoming somehow machines. And now it's time to let the machines basically collaborate together and to look at what makes us really human. And I think that creativity and intuition are very core to humans, and so we are gonna learn how to discover that and how to identify and, let's say, define and assess the value of culture and creativity. So Marx was talking a lot about labor value, all the economic theories of the 20th century, and they were they made sense back then. No matter if we agree or not, the idea of labor and those forms of alienation were making sense back then. But now we have kind of similar problems, similar grievances, similar challenges, but they are happening in the creative space, and the creative space is very different from labor. It's about intellectual property, it's about influence, it's about the intersection between all those things, and we are designing new life as a technology that can help and be the best help as possible for this new emerging creative life, let's say.
Cool. I feel like fashion plays a pretty big role in the new life ecosystem. Can you touch a little bit on how you see fashion defining kind of the cultural narratives and the evolution of aesthetics?
Sure. So there are many ways to look at fashion. We traditionally think about it as in, clothing and garments and design and trends and all of that. The way we look at fashion from a new life perspective is more, let's say, anthropologic, and it's more about the manifestation of tribalism and how it can be reflected, from a pure, like, visual, instant, let's say, perception. So when you walk in the street, you might not realize it, but you navigate, according to codes. So you look at, the physical space, obviously, to not get a wall on your head. But you will look also at costumes. You will recognize a policeman, a postman, or a policewoman, or you will recognize, lawyers or bankers versus, people who might have other occupations, and like everyone has like some kind of code. And this is because we have always been, tribal. We have always needed to have signs that allow us to recognize very quickly who belongs to what kind of. So it's a form of expression. It's like I'm wearing, this, and I want to, I don't know, appear as like some kind of startup creative guy or whatever. If I wanted to appear, corporate, I would have maybe worn a suit, or so you kind of choose your outfit as a form of expression of like what you want to show and what you belong to. And so those codes are used to be very simple. It was, for a very long time you had the slaves and the aristocrats, and the aristocrats were the ones wearing those like white socks and so on, and they would be recognized entering the palace and the castles, and that was some kind of ID to enter, while the slaves were in the fields, and they were like with mud and stuff, so they couldn't have those white socks, and they were usually tan and didn't have a white skin like the aristocrats did. So from this we moved to so that's like kind of civilization. Before that we had lots of small tribes, villages, each village has their own dance and so on, and it was really tied to where you come from and who your group is. And now basically this like biological development that we have in our mind, this capacity to recognize each other based on those visual cues and sounds and behaviors and words and so on. In the hood when I was a kid, we used to invent new words all the time to like create slangs and innovate on slangs, so that parents wouldn't understand what we were saying and stuff like that. So this is what we mean at New Life when we say fashion. It's like this idea that the way you do things and the way it's designed and the way you can coordinate with others and recognize each other or communicate things with codes. And so this is inside us. It has evolved, obviously. So we went through monarchy and capitalism, and now we are entering in this post-modernity, and you have this like giant graph of ideas and concepts that are interconnected, and people navigate them. And once you understand this, you can really have a lot of fun as a creator, because you realize that everything is about code. You know, when you compose music, you will take some sound that appeal to that kind of culture or that kind of, you know, era or place in the world. And the same with absolutely everything. Graphic design, when you use fonts, you are like saying, okay, I'm going to put some gothic stuff with some whatever, and this creates like the vibe. And so New Life looks at this as something that is actually valuable, in the sense that there is this you know, individual innovation. So some people are good creators, and good for them, you know, they make it and they become big and famous and so on, but they're actually sitting on some kind of not the shoulder of a giant, but the shoulder of a mesh, you know, brain, like a hive mind that is made of, you know, millions of people who all contribute somehow to that. And today the economy, you know, doesn't recognize this, and so this process of, you know, collective innovation that is happening, and that defines, you know, the zeitgeist of the time, like what makes, you know, 2020. Okay, the mask is a big fashion accessory this year, obviously, but each, you know, decade, 5 years and so on, the codes are changing and things are spreading, you know, like ripples all over the world. And so who owns that? And so we are looking at this very carefully, and trying to identify the mechanisms and be able to reward accordingly the people who are actually, you know, contributing to this, because this is driving a lot of economic decisions. You know, when you're a graphic designer, or, you know, whatever you do, a stylist in a movie or something, you are actually not completely creating things out of your mind. You are like taking them from the, you know, the wisdom of the crowd, let's say. And this is a lot of value that is being extracted, but not let's say not attributed and not rewarded. And so yeah, this is something we can do today with AI, with blockchain. We can have, you know, technologies that can do that. So yeah, fashion is a great starting point, because it's what's the most fashion and music are the two places where those things are easy to identify, and from there we can expand to like all the epigenetics of fashion and all the other aspects of this mechanism, which are not necessarily clothing, but, you know, all the rest.
Awesome. Yeah, fashion's always been really interesting to me, in regards to like it's very seasonal, but at the same time, as a result of that seasonality, there's a constant need to improve and develop, and as a result, they become kind of the trendsetters, I think, of the various communities, and to be able to capitalize on kind of trends and kind of sourcing trends, or kind of figuring out where they come from, where they stem from, and giving value back to those sources, or to those people, or to those brands, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
I think is a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I also believe that all those things are somehow, you know, when you look at the way the trends are being formed, it's somehow a conversation that is happening without words. So it's like, you know, you walk in the street and you see people, and you see some weirdo wearing some weird stuff, and you're like, what the fuck is this? I would never wear that. And then it enters your brain, and then you answer maybe a few days later by somehow being influenced by it, and you're not even aware of it, but it's a very subconscious, you know, conversation that is happening. You know, when you travel somewhere and you have like, you know, some custom or some, you know, behavior that people have, and you start, or some, you know, accent. Like I remember when I was in Montreal, you know, in Quebec, I started to like take some of those, you know, accent pretty quickly. You know, you pick up on those things, and we like this whole, you know, thing that we call, you know, culture or fashion or trends. It's a conversation that is happening at a very deep level of the mind, and we are, you know, exchanging information, yeah, at a very deep level, and that's fascinating when you start to, you know, look at it and try to understand, you know, why is, you know, Yeezy so successful, for example, or why, you know, some brands are suddenly, or some artists, or some music. What are the mechanisms behind? Because there is a method to the madness, and it's very interesting to look at this.
Yeah, definitely. And now you mentioned AI and these types of things. I think it's really interesting that we're able to now kind of utilize these technologies to start to be able to add an added layer of awareness or understanding of how these trends evolve and develop. How important do you think like AI will be in kind of this new era that we're headed into? And not only AI, but I want to talk a little bit about blockchain as well, and kind of how you see that being implemented in not only what you're doing, but kind of what's happening in the world at large.
Right. So if you look at the internet, it's this like network that accelerates everything, and it allows people to connect and to access information. It's the biggest information revolution, let's say, in the entire history of humanity. And this was just the beginning of something, because AI and blockchain are going to amplify that to an order of magnitude. So it's like we still didn't see and measure the whole impact of what internet had on us. It's massive at all levels. It has flattened the world a lot. I wouldn't be there without internet. Everyone has now access to information somehow equally, and has much more opportunity than before. Obviously, it's not everything. Like, access to information doesn't do everything, but it can flip a lot of things. What AI, the way I see it is, if internet was a person, blockchain would be the bone structure. So today the bone structure is an exoskeleton. It's like you have the court system with lawyers and courts and judges and stuff. But you see clearly that they cannot deal with the level of subtleness of the internet. It's very hard to regulate the internet. It's kind of become arbitrary to like who has the most money. When you look at what tech giants can get away with, and smaller companies cannot afford the lobbying and stuff. So it's very, very difficult to apply the law. It has become very subjective, and we need to have tools. So for example, eBay was a very powerful platform because it could deal with those little disputes. Same for PayPal, same for all the tech companies that succeed somehow have a component of regulation and limiting. There's a great book called Code as Law or something like that, or The Code is Law or something like that, where if something is forbidden by the law, it's forbidden for everyone. If it's forbidden by the law, you can do it, but then if you get caught, you get punished. When with the code, if you cannot do it, you just cannot do it. If you want to put your profile picture there and the place is there, you cannot just violate it and then get punished later on, incarcerated or whatever. You can just do whatever the technology allows you to do, unless you're a hacker, which is the new form of criminality. But overall, it's not that widespread. Most people, traditional people, they just cannot violate the code. And so this gives tremendous amount of power to the people who create the code, basically, because they become the new judge, like Judge Dredd, I'm the law. And we might not want to have such a high level of centralization. And it poses also some questions of trust. Do you trust someone to handle absolutely everything in society? Do you want a bunch of companies? I love the guys in the Silicon Valley, but can we, trust people with such a high amount of power? I think that technology is going to be more and more powerful. And so maybe this code is law can be actually decentralized and put in the hands of the people, and have some form of trustless or ways to formulate those technological architectures that make it impossible for one person or one group of people to run it, but rather something that's immutable, that everyone agrees on, and that people can control somehow on crowd level. And so that's the blockchain. So it's the bone structure. The bones define what you cannot do. So it's like I cannot move my arm any further, because my bones prevent me from doing that. And then you have the other side, which is the AI, which is the muscle. And so the muscle is like, all the intelligence and all the, moving data all over the place. Data is the blood somehow. So data goes to the brain. Brain is some kind of muscle. And then you have the arms, the legs, and so on. And so AI defines what you can do and what can be amplified. And so AI can be used either as a replacement for humans. So sometimes it's very useful, to have AI dealing with a couple of things that are really not fun, like, driving trucks or packing stuff, using robots in factory lines, is good because it allows people to be free and do better things. But it can also be used for as an amplifier of human capacity. So if you use AI, you can do things that you can look at, millions of data, and it can help you make better decisions. It can, and what's very interesting is that the industrialism and modernity was about linear thinking and IQ, and I think that AI can somehow make most people irrelevant because AI will be smarter than them, but also it can flatten the world and provide intelligence to people who don't have so much of it, or at least, this linear intelligence, and maybe empower those who have other skill sets. So you have some people today who have very high IQ, but they lack all the other qualities, and they have a lot of power because the system is designed by and for people with very high IQ. But if you say, okay, now IQ is not that necessary, maybe other skills, such as, being funny, cracking jokes, being social, being kind, I don't know, whatever, all kinds of qualities that cannot be offered by AI can be, owned by humans that will use AI to fulfill this like little skill, which is linear thinking and the capacity to. So it will create like some kind of new, enhancement to humans on top of being hyper connected and all that. And so if you combine the two, blockchain, AI, and you put this into post-modernity, you end up with like a world that's completely different from what we have seen before. And that's why we talk about new life, because it's not just like one more tool or one little, problem solving, startup. We really see new life as a new infrastructure to provide the most optimal, approach to this new creative post-AI blockchain world, and trying to do it well, basically in this very comprehensive approach, because sometimes you have to zoom out and you have to look at things like, so a lot of people have criticized us for trying to see too big, and to just boil the sea, boil the ocean or something. I don't know what's the expression, but I think that sometimes it's necessary. You have to rethink, and look at the big picture.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really important. Especially as we're moving into this new era, I think it's going to be really important to kind of take a more multidisciplinary, top-down kind of big picture approach, because in order to solve a lot of these problems that we're faced with, we have to understand how the systems work in a really big way. And then not only that, like how to create structures around that to allow people to have the conversations that are needed, to allow space for the influence of the human to come into play as well into the technology. It's really important. Kind of on that same note, you're familiar with DACs and DAOs, I'm sure. What kind of role do you see systems like that playing into this sort of more decentralized future? And for those of you who don't know, DAC is like decentralized autonomous company or collective or community, or DAO is decentralized autonomous organization. So it's like adding a layer of autonomy into these decentralized worlds. How do you kind of see those being used?
Right. So today there are two main mechanisms for legal governance of things, for let's say three. So you have the community type, so I've traveled in Morocco once, and I was in this oasis where people were living, in an oasis. So it's like the desert all around, and there is no police, no money, no court, and they just have to like solve disputes like in their own way. So there were like 5,000 people, And I was like asking, stupid questions like, but what happens if someone steals something? And the guy was like, well, there is no incentive to steal because it's like, we are all friends here. So it's like your family would be ashamed and they would like repay or something. And that's pretty much it. So that's one way of doing things, in the hood. It's the same. You have a lot of, black market and stuff. People were coming, in my building to buy stuff from some drug dealers and stuff. And yeah, this is not regulated by any form of infrastructure, and it works because again, it's like, okay, so that's one way of doing things. And humanity has worked with that, and still in many parts of the world, I assume, in rural areas, people are still, relying on reputation, trust, and this kind of stuff. And then you have the second type. It's the court system. So you can like register, your marriage, your company, or whatever, any form of commitment, and you will have people, enforcing those contracts using, the court, the judges, and so on. And then you have the third form of governance, which is like a subset, let's say, of the court system, which is the corporate governance, where you will elect someone to take decisions, and you will enforce like some kind of rights that you have as a shareholder of this organization. And so what's in common with all those things is that it's a community coming together and defining a standard of behavior and saying, okay, if you deviate from this standard of behavior, you will lose some advantage, some privileges. So sometimes it's, criminal law and you can lose your freedom. Sometimes it's just money most of the time, or you can lose your job. So as a CEO, if you fuck up a couple of times, you might, get voted out by the shareholders. And sometimes you have contracts that say, no, you cannot be voted out, like, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg has done a very good job at protecting himself from that, and he's he has all the power to run the company, and good for him. And so what DAOs are, it's somehow a contraction of all those things using the blockchain, where communities can handle very, very subtle and tiny forms of governance, because the type of governance I was talking about, usually they have a very high barrier to entry. You need to hire some lawyers, you need to do some paperwork. It's like complicated to incorporate a company and to enforce all those rules. While a DAO, it's like a piece of software that is running on the blockchain. So it's like immutable. It's running on many computers at the same time. So you would have to hack all the computers. Like Bitcoin, it's just impossible to break it. And then you can define rules, and they are running on the code, and some people can be elected to like solve whatever things they are in charge of. So it could be used for a party, let's say. So you want to have an event with some friends, and you want to elect who's going to be in charge of the DJs and who's going to be in charge of the selling tickets and so on, and people will like buy their units of ownership, and they will vote with that. Then you have maybe long term, like let's buy a hotel all together, and like 1,000 people will unite, and they will fund the purchase of a hotel, and they will have the capacity to administrate and to vote for like decisions that serve their interest. And so the power of DAO is that it costs nothing, so you can build it like even if you are just doing it for a certain purpose that wouldn't usually require such a high level of investment. So today, for example, when you create a movie, most of movies are actually companies. So in Hollywood, the studios, they create a new company for each movie, and then they sell shares of this company. DAOs could be used for movies, could be used for songs, could be used for absolutely everything, anything that requires people to enforce a certain desired behavior that people commit to manifest, let's say, within the community or the organization. And they can do that also from all over the world. So you could have DAOs for people to provide any kind of service, or so. It's very experimental at this point, but it appears that it's definitely superior to companies and governments for all those kind of little situations that are not so I don't see very near the time where DAOs are going to replace the court and the police for like the basic stuff of like property rights and safety. But definitely for all those things where it's very hard today to to organize some kind of governance. It's going to make it possible, and so it's going to empower so many people, especially in parts of the world that are kind of lacking of infrastructures to provide. It's very easy to look at blockchain from our OECD countries or wealthy countries and be like, yeah, sure, who cares about blockchain? I have a very good bank account and I don't have any problem with my government and stuff. Yeah, good for you. But what about people who live in less privileged areas, and so those technologies I think will serve them first, and they can also be used by us, by creators, by artists, to define some rules of the game and maybe change them along the way, and to innovate much faster than going back to the court. I think that DAOs can be great also for the regulation of AI. I see a lot of attempts like OpenAI or a lot of regulators who try to regulate AI, but I think that level of expertise, that level of because you need to understand AI, you need to understand each specific application of AI, and going to that level of specialism, I don't see any form of Congress or Senate or any lawmaker basically having the necessary skill to cover all the areas that AI is going to cover. So I definitely see as like a very distributed and localized and specialized form of governance that I think can do the trick and can help us in many situations where governments would be a bit won't have the skills basically, and we also don't want the corporations to take that role. We see that today corporations are writing most of the laws through lobbies and stuff, because they have this expertise. So if you look at pharma or tech giants or whatever that's advanced, most lawmakers, they are just basic people. Like you see them in the hearings with tech giants, and they are asking questions that make us roll our eyes, because they have also to make the questions accessible to the wider public. And I definitely see some kind of coordination between those bodies, and like a hierarchy of like a breakdown of people who are much more specialized and who can use those mechanisms of governance to be very specific about some areas of AI.
Yeah, I think a really interesting point that you brought up is that you're able to kind of do this kind of innovations and things like this very rapidly due to kind of this live real-time kind of A/B testing, where you're able to engage with your community and you're able to bring some people forward and bring them to be a part of the conversation of like, how do you want to see this ecosystem evolve and develop? And then you can even give them attribution or some sort of payment or some sort of value based on their input into the community. Just something that I've seen you guys kind of exploring with New Life as well, with kind of the oracles and these different, and your Telegram groups, and kind of seeing how you can make a better product while you're building the product, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's very recursive. There are two main, or there are a lot of them, but two values that are important to us are agility and transparency, and the form of listening to users and listening to the whole community, and not trying to imagine what people want. And I think that DAO is like the way to put this on the code and to put this on the law. Basically, it's like build products and make everyone somehow involved, and make everyone part of the democratic process. When you wake up in the morning and your favorite social network completely changed their UX or added a new feature, and you are like, okay, so now this product, I invested so much of my time on it, and I built for years and years. I've heard many stories of retailers online who were building their business, and they had good positions on Google, and then suddenly they changed their algorithm, and they are out of business. Or people who invested a lot of time on their Instagram or whatever social media, and the rules are changing, sorry, goodbye. And so I think that those things, people will regain trust and will love technology again when they will feel this level of transparency. And so we have been experiencing a lot of things. We try to talk as much as possible. We have not done it always the best way. It's again very experimental, but I think it's important to have some form of constitution, and then to try to always respect it, and then involve users into so yeah, we have been in beta so far, so I don't think anyone really invested so much energy into it, but we will always try to make it as open and transparent as possible. And so the Telegram group is amazing for that. We have 1,000 people coming and expressing their excitement, their frustrations, their questions, and we are learning a lot, and we are trying to build this culture, let's say, and a lot of people are actually surprised by that. They're like, wow, it's the first app where you can actually talk to the team that's behind it. And it's like in the blockchain space, it's kind of granted because of the nature of a lot of economic transactions, millions and stuff, so people expect this kind of open conversations. But for more less tech savvy people like creators, artists, and so on, it's like, oh wow, that's new. You can actually talk to the guys who are behind the app, and that creates. So we are experimenting this new culture.
Yeah, I think it's really great. And it's really fascinating, kind of as we're able to explore these new technologies. The possibilities open up, they're pretty endless. I'd like for you to maybe touch a little bit on how we can kind of, and I think you're doing it in some sense through New Life, but how can we start to build better foundations for how to engage with a new mindset, kind of moving from this old mindset of scarcity mindset, this kind of more capitalist mindset, into this kind of more postmodern world of abundance that I see things moving towards very rapidly. Could you touch a little bit on your thoughts on how to kind of span that gap, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question you are asking, because it's not only about technology, it's also the humans in front of this technology, and the culture, and the mindset. And I think that this transition towards postmodernity requires a couple of things, in my opinion. The first one, I would say, is the capacity for having meaning in conversations. I see a lot of misunderstandings between people. So they throw words, but the meaning of those words is actually changing. And when you say liberal, some people will hear, oh, this corporate liberalism with hyper capitalist, and some people will hear, oh no, liberal means actually that you are fine with people living their life the way they want. And so we end up in these massive wars on social media, where people use words and talk about one thing, and the other person talks about something else, and sometimes it's very subtle, but it creates a big confusion, and then it creates this distance, and we are being increasingly distant, when social media was designed initially to get us closer. And so I think that one area that is not really observed enough, I would say, is meaning. What do you mean? What's your intent? What's the intent behind what you are saying? Do you really want to offend people? Are you really an asshole? Or maybe we just don't have the same definition of words, or maybe we misunderstood each other, or maybe and have this expectation, or this distinction, let's say, in conversations. And I think this is going to be extremely important, because the world is getting very complex, and we try to simplify, because the human brain, when you see too much complexity, your first reaction is no, I want to simplify, I want to create boxes. So there's the evil capitalist here, or there is the whatever here, and we try to simplify, but actually it's dangerous. And I think the best way to simplify is to really go back to okay, so what's the goal of this conversation? Do you want to learn something from me? Do you want to argue for the sake of arguing? Do you want to fight? Do you want to be right? And do you want to prove something? Do you want to demonstrate something? And or the other way around, are you willing to listen? Are you interested in maybe changing your mind about something? this is not happening. People are just like rushing into conclusion. This is guy, I have to decide in 3 seconds if he's my ally or if he's my enemy. And we are being like so divided, and we are losing so much, potential because of that, so much energy. So I think that if we could recycle like all the energy we spend, trying to judge and criticize and to find, some forms of tribalism, and it's kind of normal, with globalism, we need to find some sense of tribe and to differentiate each other. That's why, the sports, music, like all those fashion are so strong and are getting stronger, every day. Nationalism as well, like all forms of tribalism, are coming back because people are very, disoriented right now. And so I think that we need to be aware of that and think how we can work from there, because today we don't even think about it. We just, act and jump into everything. And so, yeah, I would say that's the first thing. The second one is again, this idea of coordination. How can you, be creative and have forms of communication with others that are actually productive in terms of, understanding what people want and where they are coming from. And so this is like the biggest skill to develop in the coming years. And then there is obviously mental health. It's like extremely important, because we cannot rely on static code of conduct as it was the case before. So we had religions for thousands of years. It was always the same, so everything was predictable. You could interact and interoperate with others according to some codes, and it's easier with people from your religion or from your culture. But now we decided to just open the doors and to have everyone connecting with everyone. And if we do that, we have to come with at least a very, very good mental health, because most of the time, it's like some trauma, some pain that come from our background that tend to create those complications along the way, and kind of produce those like misunderstandings between people. And then I would say the creative mindset, it's about mood. Mood is very important to ask yourself, like, how am I, again, like, what am I trying to achieve here, and to be mindful. So that's why there is an explosion of mindfulness. I'm very interested in this topic right now, how to look at your mind and look at the ways you can just have those echo chambers, or those like when the microphone gets this like very high pitched sound. I forgot the name, but
Feedback.
Yeah, exactly. Feedback loop, where it's like you start to see something dark and then it goes like crazy and crazy, and so yeah, all those like aspects I think are the big challenge, because all the rest is actually pretty solved now. We are entering in an age of abundance. If you look at the cost of things is going to go down massively. It already started, but it's going to continue soon. I think everything will be for free, because robots and machines, if we continue to grow in the way we are, at the pace we are currently with the internet, with technology, education, and all of that, we might end up with solving like all those problems. And so then it's about coming with this like mindset of abundance, as you were mentioning. I think that we need to forget like the scarcity, the trauma of scarcity, and realize that if we stop wasting, the only thing we have to do now is to stop wasting time and stop wasting energy. Because today we have the luxury, you have people sitting all day long arguing with people, like that's luxury. People used to work in the field all day long to try to get some food at the end of the day for themselves, for their community and stuff. Like, we didn't have a second to argue. It's like you had to survive. You had to go through the dark winters and all those like very hard time. We are freaking out with COVID and stuff, but back in the days they would die from the plague and it would be like 100% death rate. It's like you catch the thing and you just die. We come back from like slaughters and all kinds of very, very hard time, and so we still have the trauma of this. And because we are like, wow, this is too good to be true, everyone has like hot water, like much more people have hot water, much more people have access to information, technology and stuff. This can be true. I have this thing in the back of my mind that life needs to be hard, that I need to be afraid, that I need to be, worried about the future and so on. And so because we cannot find those actual pain, then we kind of orchestrate it and we provoke it and we inflict it on ourselves. And we all do that to a certain extent. Like, I'm not here to, say that I'm better than anyone else, but I think that's something to really look at, and how we can, self-sabotage, and how we can refuse to accept this age of abundance that is upon us.
That's really interesting. And I feel like you touched on a really important point, talking kind of about the mental health. I think it's really important that we really take the time, and you mentioned another point as well of mindfulness, to be mindful and to really step into an awareness of who we are, what our desires are, what's important to us. And I think that being faced with something like COVID has really allowed a lot of people to kind of take this deeper look at themselves of like, this is like, what's really important to me now as a human being. And in doing that, we need to have the stability of being mentally clear, having that clarity of being able to define for ourselves what we need, what we want, and then ultimately out of that be able to take action. I think that's a really important thing.
Yes, I think that, postmodernism, which is different from postmodernity, it has been a lot about deconstruction and criticism. And I see also, so many very smart people just spending their time, deconstructing and criticizing things. Now we have the tool to actually, design the world we want to see. Like we can literally do that. We can connect with people, we can organize, we can collaborate, and it's just going to amplify over time. So I think this like observation of like, oh, the world is stuck and blah blah blah, and this is bad. We can actually take action, if you want to, if you are not happy with the current situation. And of course, I talk about abundance. Like, of course, we are far from perfection. We still have a lot of homelessness. We still have a lot of people like under the poverty, extreme poverty, line. And so all those problems are there. It's getting better. Obviously, the numbers are very clear. It's been getting better for the last hundreds of years. But if you are not happy with it, like now you can actually do something about it. You have much more tools, and I think that you definitely have a point here that taking action,
Yeah, it's a lot easier to take action in the modern world for sure. And something I'm also interested in is like, what is kind of moving away from the isms. You mentioned like postmodernism, and we have capitalism and Marxism and communisms and all these isms. I think we're at a really interesting point in time where we're now able to define kind of a new cultural narrative, and we're able to look beyond kind of the sort of boxes that we've been putting things in. Like you're saying, we like to compartmentalize things because it's easier. We like to kind of break things down and be like, oh, that's just socialism, that's just capitalism. Like, I think that we need to start to move beyond those isms and get into a new conversation based around kind of this mindset of abundance, and based around the fact that we are living in a very technologically advanced world. And I just think it's fascinating. We're at a very fascinating precipice, I guess, in human history.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, what's interesting also, it's coordination. When you look at the blockchain space, when you look at the tech world, when you look at all those organizations, what you see is like tons of people who are redundant, who are doing like almost the same thing, but because there is ego involved, it's like, okay, I'm going to do my own way because I'm better than everyone else, or I want to prove that I'm better. And I think we are missing out, when you look at centralized organizations, you look at tech giants, or, countries like China or something, like they are very strong because they are centralized. And, there is one decision that comes from the top and it's like, boom, everyone is like working like in this, it's like, those opera, with like the, how is it called? Like the guy with the sticks who
The conductor.
conductor, yeah, exactly. So you have a conductor and everyone is like, super aligned and stuff. And this works a lot when you are not doing something creative, obviously, because if it was, freestyle opera, it would be complicated, or choreography, so those things somehow. But there is also this magic thing called coordination, where you can be creative and you can be horizontal and create with other people around you. And if we cannot do that, then the centralization will always win. Authoritarianism, the corporate structure is always going to win if we cannot unite. So when you look at 20,000 teams of engineers working on similar things, and then on the other side, tech giant with just 2,000 people coordinated because of the the corporate structure, then you kind of lose a lot, because on one side, corporate structure has some advantages and it has some disadvantages, such as the lack of flexibility and creativity in the process for the people who build stuff, and then on the other side you have the freedom and you have all the creativity, but it's not coordinated. It's it's chaos. And I think that if we can bring coordination on the free world, let's say, or the more independent groups of people, we can do so much. And so that's an area where with New Life we are very interested in. The biggest challenge here is ego. People that think oh, I'm a magazine. The other day I was talking with a magazine publisher, and I talked to the guy and I'm like, hey, let's do this together and stuff. And he's like, what? But you are doing the same as me. New Life is somehow a magazine, and why would I collaborate with you? And I built this in the last 20 years. Why would I? And yeah, I think that's a big obstacle. And I understand the place he's coming from. That's the world where we grew up in, and it's it's mine, and maybe mine can be even bigger if you multiply it with the power of other people. And that's kind of, where I see, a big competitive advantage for people who are using New Life versus people who are no, I'm an artist, I'm the best, I'm big, and I don't want to share any of this with anyone, And I think that the people who coordinate will share, will win. And this has been seen, when you look at trap culture, for example, this kind of open source, model where people kind of copying each other but doing it in their own way, the flow and the beats and the music videos and stuff, they all kind of look the same. So it's yeah, you take the creativity of others, but you add your own, flavor to it, and then you put it back, and then someone else, and it's everyone contributes, and tribe doesn't really belong to anyone, but somehow it's much more productive than people being isolated and trying to do their own style. And there's this video of Snoop Dogg mocking the trap at the beginning, and I guess now I think he has already started making some songs that are trappy. And yeah, I think that this is the New Life. Basically, it's coordination, creativity, communities, caring for one another, sharing. This is unstoppable, and it's going to beat the other models. Even if you are selfish or whatever, you will still win more by taking part in those networks.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it's something that has to do with kind of, as we shift into this new era of abundance, we shift our thinking. I think a part of the system that you're building is going to kind of break a lot of the old spells and a lot of the trauma around intellectual property, around this idea of you're a creator, you deserve kind of this value. And I feel like we're so traumatized by being taken advantage of, at least as creators. For me personally, as an artist, we get very traumatized because the world takes advantage of us. The corporations come in and they take a trend and they kind of squeeze the life out of it. And that artist who maybe created that trend never got any respect or awareness or anything around that. And I think that as we're able to utilize systems like New Life, we're going to be able to kind of break a lot of that trauma, because we're able to then move into a world where that attribution is no longer something that we crave. It's now something that's built into the system at its very fundamental core. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I think that we want to create the opposite of the situation now, where people are being ripped off and they kind of feel anxious about it, and they become defensive and no, it's mine, and no, and they don't know who to trust, and they're usually very resistant and defensive to like collaborate. When it depends where. If you go to London and you want to do a shooting, like you just go to Instagram, you write, and you have like 10 people who show up, like, yeah, let's do it. And then you have Paris people, it's like, how much is it paid, and blah blah blah, and like it's like a mindset, and I understand the place it's coming from, and I think that we need to think more in terms of abundance, and like, I'm going to provide, and somehow things are going to be fair, and this somehow things are going to be fair needs to be done. In music it works kind of okay, with copyright collectives, like they measure the revenue of your songs across, even though it's still flowed with the radios, like making business with the measurement, like the organisms that measure the audience and stuff. So it's still like flowed, but it kind of works. And I think that with New Life we can apply that model with the AI and with the tracking and the blockchain, and bring so much more efficiency into this, to give like this safety of like, okay, I'm just going to create, I'm just going to follow my flow, and somehow things are going to be taken care of. And that's the ultimate goal. It's a big challenge. We don't have so many means, because investors and people who are in the current system, they just don't get it. I don't think it's bad will or something, they just don't understand it. They're like, but what problem are you solving? But it's too many problems, and you are doing what? Blockchain and AI and creativity, and they just don't get it. And we try to like narrow it down, and we are trying to make it more digestible, but somehow like we always go back to the same, like the vision from 2015, 16, 17, like I always go back to it, because that's the best formula. Like what we came up with is like the best formula to serve this creative space, and we just have to get better at making things work together, and we are getting there.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'd like to talk a little bit I know you I feel like you've been on the cutting edge of a lot of things for a number of years. I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on both what does a utopian future kind of look like to you, and then what does a more dystopian future look like to you, and kind of where do you think we're headed? Like, are we somewhere in between, or are we more utopian, dystopian?
Yeah, I think it's 50-50, definitely. We are moving forward like towards those two outcomes at the same time. They are both, like happening at the same time. I guess that, the big challenge for the mind is to project in the future. We see the pain in the moment, but we cannot really see the things that, it's like taking a loan or taking a debt. It's like we are taking a lot of ethical debts currently. So we are like taking the comfort of like those, big platforms and the data stuff and the personalization and the free services and so on. There will be a repayment for that, and it's going to be very expensive in terms of freedom, in terms of so the dystopia. Let's start with the negative one. It looks like total surveillance and form of filtering of society. On one side, the ones that serve the interest of the power in place, like some kind of 1984. I think you just need to read the book, and it was already written in the 40s, and it describes perfectly where we are now. A little bit mixed with Brave New World, with the more like, let's say, a consensual form of control. So that's the dystopian part, and it is happening. Like opportunities like COVID are great ways to advance those. Like there will always be people like that, across history. It has always existed. You always have like people who love to control, who love to watch surveillance, like even in human relationships, like spouse, like parents, like you always have different kinds of behavior. I'm gonna trust, or I'm gonna like watch everything and try to control everything. So it happens also in the power structures. You have some power structures that want more freedom and people to not be afraid and to be free and so on. And you have some power structures that are like pushing narratives that are like frightening people and having them scream at each other in the metro because the mask is not high enough and stuff. So you see like all those things happening, and it's like super scary, obviously. You don't want to, move too much in that direction. But also the other side is also happening, and it's abundance, it's freedom, it's freedom of speech, like in many parts of the world. In the West, like we were doing pretty okay, but yeah, all over the world, like people are more free, they are more themselves. Time, we are saving a lot of time that we can allocate to better things, and becoming creative, growing. Like violence is on the decline, like an order of magnitude, even wars, like it's just that now we cover things much more. So it looks like there is more wars, more killings every day and so on, when in fact it's the exact opposite. Like I think it was in the 16th century in Paris or something, or 17, there were like 15 people found dead every morning in the streets of Paris, and now when someone gets killed by a terrorist or something, it's like a big deal, and we talk about it for years. So yeah, I think the world is like, like Demolition Man, like this kind of world, where everyone is kind and peaceful and stuff. So yeah, there are like all those aspects of life. Equality also, I see more and more, women entrepreneur or minority people, like, doing their business and succeeding and stuff. So we have so much, good stuff happening. We have so much value that is being produced, and it's exponential. And on the other side, you have like the freaks who just want to control us, as it has always been across history. We find them everywhere. So we better build the infrastructures that kind of shield us from it going too far, because it can sometimes go too far, and with technology it can accelerate. So some people are afraid of AI taking over the world and terminating us. I'm much more worried or concerned about the humans behind those AI, because AI is an amplifier of anything. So
yeah, it's a ultimate amplifier of our intentions. I was in a really interesting conversation the other day about AI and autonomous weapons and these types of things, and the roles that AI plays in that world. But even along that same line, it's like maybe we'll get to the point where we no longer have to fight wars because our AIs are running simulated wars. It's like, okay, well, the AIs can fight the wars now, so they can run all these simulations and be like, okay, well, this round, if these series things go in this direction, then this place wins, and then maybe we kind of do a lot of our global power fights through some sort of externalized simulated experience. I think that'd be a really fascinating thing.
That would be awesome. An esports version of World War III would be
exactly. Well, yeah, awesome. I guess what are some of the things that you're most excited about, I guess, as we kind of move into this new era?
The things I'm the most excited about, it would sound stupid, but the perspective of having much better capacities to like better jetpacks, basically, like the capacity to fly. I think this is awesome. It's like my dream. I dream all the time at night that I'm flying. So if I can do that in my lifetime, I think I would have a lot of fun. Have you heard about this guy who was on a jetpack in the LA airport? He was caught like a few times by plane pilots who said like there is a guy at 5 miles in the sky, like on a jetpack.
Yeah, I saw something about that.
This is super cool. Yeah, I think, on a spiritual level, like to be able to elevate, and to fly also as well, like, Neo in the Matrix, like to remove all those like self-sabotage and restrictions, and be able to just, be full of love and care and abundance. And I think we can get there. I think we have the capacity. I've seen, progression in many people, like myself and others around, and I see, the beauty of growth, and I wish, everyone to discover that and to be addicted to this, like, capacity to experience life in a very different way and to enjoy, this process of growth. So yeah, that's I would say the number one, and number two, flying.
Awesome. I think we're going to kind of start to wind down here. Is there any kind of final thoughts you'd like to touch on?
Well, I think that I'm very excited by this podcast. I would love to look at the other episodes. I think that so many interesting people and thoughts I'm sure you are creating. So I'm very excited and grateful for this and for the beautiful work that you are putting out there. And yeah, if anyone who connects with the New Life vision and what we are doing, like, we are always looking for opportunities to expand the network. It takes a village, so we want to make a massive transformation. So yeah, so any form of contribution is welcome. And yeah, let's see how, I don't know when this video is released, or whenever you behind your computer is watching, but we will have made some kind of progress at that point, and we will always be happy to support you as a creator, and to basically expand the connections with the ecosystem, with all the great people that have joined us since the beginning.
Sweet. And then any sort of last final thoughts on some tangible steps that our listeners can kind of take to living a better life, or to moving into a place to be able to support this kind of new way of living?
Tangible step. I would say read a lot. Like, reading is so cool. Audiobook work as well. But yeah, to be in a mindset of being an eternal student, like we are kind of traumatized by, I'm talking about myself now, but I tend to not like so much, the scholar system, because it's like, you are forced to learn things that they think you should learn at that moment. And it's like, eat oysters, but yeah, maybe I would like oysters, but not in this context of being forced to eat them. So learn something new, that follow your interest, and learn things that are useful in the moment you need to learn. So if you have to, I don't know, do some 3D design, learn 3D design, and think about how you can use the internet to just improve yourself, because internet can be used as a alcohol, party, drug and stuff, and I have nothing against any of that, but you can also decide sometimes, and most of the times even better, to use the internet as a great extension of your mind to learn new things. And there is an unlimited of value out there, and so if you can curate and select the right things you expose your mind to, you will enhance your life in ways that are massive. If you can just improve by reading 1 hour, 0.1% your life every day, after years, it's a lot. It's a lot of value, it's a lot of happiness.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today and sharing all of your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for having me, and looking forward to meet you in person again.
Sounds good.